At this point, it's basically a mini-series all on its own when it comes to talking about Luthen being a Jedi, so here is one more video to add to the collection.
This will make a fine addition to my collection.
In the 2 videos that I've done before this, most of it covered the different possible clues that the show might be hinting to us regarding Luthen's background. But in this particular video, we're going to take a little bit of a step away, at least for a little bit, and do some character comparisons, specifically between Luthen and Dooku's Apprentice. And no, it's not Qui-Gon Jinn, we're here to talk about Dooku's other lesser-known apprentice by the name of Rael Aveross. Based on his name, you can already see why some Star Wars fans out there have started to point out the possibility that Luthen Rael is Rael Aveross, possibly having changed his name following Order 66, and it's a really exciting theory to consider. But just who exactly is Rael Aveross? Well, Aveross was Dooku's apprentice before Qui-Gon Jinn even came into the picture. Born on the planet Ringo Vinda, Averross was a rather talented Jedi, considered to be one of the best duelists within the Jedi Order, but Averross did have issues when it came to conforming with the Jedi Code. Much like Dooku and Qui-Gon, Averross was a little bit more flexible when it came to interpreting the rules. To give a basic rundown of what we know about him so far, we know that during the invasion of Naboo, Averross had his own apprentice, an apprentice that he was forced to strike down after nanotech took control of her brain and pitted her against him. This traumatic incident led to a sense of guilt within Averross. Although he was cleared for any wrongdoing, Averross was sent away on another assignment by the Council, one that would take him to the planet Pajal. At this point in time, the planet Pajal is going through a turbulent political climate. The ruler of the planet had recently died, leaving a 6-year-old girl as heir, far too young to assume authority. And so Averross was sent there to act as a regent until she became of age. Part of the reason why the council sent him to the planet in the first place, believing that if he cared for a little girl, it might help him find closure with what happened to his Padawan. But being regent of a planet also meant that he had to deal with a lot of politics, having to handle various political factions and influential entities such as the Zerka Corporation. However, during his time on Pajal, things escalated to the point where he had to call in Qui-Gon Jinn for assistance alongside Kenobi. After this matter was resolved, Dooku actually reached out to him and encouraged him to join the Sith, an offer that he refused. And Aveross's story more or less ends there. There is really not much known about what happened to him after, especially after Order 66. And immediately you might be able to recognize that there are some interesting similarities between Luthen and Aveross besides sharing the same name Rael. The first thing to point out is how similar their personalities are, and the fact that from a character progression standpoint, it's very plausible that someone like Aveross could end up being like Luthen. Part of the reason why Aveross had such difficulty with conforming to the Jedi Code is likely due to the influence of his former master Dooku, who, as we have seen in the Tales of the Jedi, had quite the pragmatic mindset when it came to dealing with problems.
My friend, your devotion to rules is sometimes inspiring and sometimes maddening.
Quite willing to compromise the Jedi Code if it meant securing a better outcome. A sort of the end justify the means sort of mentality. And we see this trait in Aveross as well. In a conversation between Qui-Gon and Aveross, Qui-Gon confided in him the fact that Dooku had tortured a bounty hunter by the name of Shenda Moy. But Aveross didn't seem particularly concerned by the news, possibly sharing the same philosophy with Dooku and trusting that his former master knew what was best. Not only is this pragmatic mindset un-Jedi-like, it also mirrors the way Luthen thinks, albeit at a much more extreme level. Luthen's monologue perfectly surmises his way of thinking, the same sort of thinking that led to Dooku joining Sidious, and so knowing that Aveross too possessed this way of thinking, it doesn't seem that far-fetched that his character would develop into Luthen following the events of Order 66 and the rise of the Empire. The extent of loss, grief, and anger that Aveross had to face following these events could very well lead him into becoming Luthen, following a very similar path as Dooku did. It should also be noted that Aveross's experience with intrigue and politics could lend itself very well to the things that Luthen is facing. It would give him the necessary skills and tools to manage an underground rebellion, something which Luthen is quite good at. There's also a part of Luthen's monologue that Aveross' story might add some color to, especially when we were talking about the possibility of Luthen being a Jedi, and it's specifically the love part of this line.
Kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
As we all know, love isn't exactly an aspect that the Jedi Order encourages. It's often considered to be a bit of a taboo, especially under the prequel Jedi Order. But there is a part of Aveross' story that explores this a little. During Qui-Gon's visit to Pajal, Qui-Gon discovers that Aveross has had a sexual relationship with a local innkeeper by the name of Selby. And this is a point that Qui-Gon questions Rael on, to which the Jedi openly states that falling in love, that's what the Jedi Code forbids. Getting laid, not so much, not if it's casual like me and Selby. This line from Aveross clearly portrays his flexible attitude towards the Jedi Code, but it might also hint towards a possible evolution into a romantic relationship. It's entirely possible that what started off as a casual relationship ends up being something romantic. If this is indeed the case, then it would add a whole lot more meaning to when Luthen talks about love, perhaps suggesting that because of the path he chose to walk down, he had no choice but to leave such relationships behind. Another crazy point to note is that Aveross was at one point known to have consumed death sticks on Takodana.
You wanna buy some death sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
I don't wanna sell you death sticks.
Clearly, the guy is very flexible with the Jedi Code, doing things that straight arrows like Kenobi would never dream of. And the other Jedi around Aveross would also describe him as prideful and extremely reckless. The first of which was mentioned by Luthen himself.
My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight.
And the second of which we've gotten to see more and more of, a growing recklessness that Luthen himself attributes to hiding too long.
I took him on the Fondor. Was I insane?
You were desperate for Aldani to work, and it did.
I'm not slipping, Leia. I've just been hiding for too long.
But my favorite bit of detail about Aveross' story that shares a lot of similarity with Luthen is actually his accent. Now, in the Andor show, we can clearly hear Luthen's accent, a rather rare accent that we have never heard before, at least when it comes to the Star Wars galaxy. Well, in the case of Aveross, it actually describes that the Jedi had retained his Ringo Vinda accent. And if you dig further, the Ringo Vindan accent that Aveross had actually belongs to a very specific human cultural group on the planet. It's described as speaking Galactic Basic Standard with a distinctive accent, and I've tried to look online to see if there was an example of a Ringo Vindan accent, but there doesn't seem to be. The audiobook Master and Apprentice, which is where Aveross makes his first appearance, does give him a sort of an American accent, but it's hardly distinctive to the point of interest. Besides, such story detail could easily be switched around, and live action material is often given priority when it comes to establishing accents. In fact, the whole planet of Ringo Vinda is relatively unexplored, except for a few scenes during the Clone Wars, which didn't even take place on the planet. So there is certainly a possibility that the accent we hear Luthen using is a Ringo Vindan accent. Considering that we've never heard a Star Wars character use this particular accent, there is definitely room for some creativity to use Skarsgård's natural accent as the Ringo Vindan accent. One particular story beat in Aveross' story that I found very similar to Andor was when Aveross first met Selby, the hostess who he shared a casual relationship with. And his meeting with Selby really reminded me of Cassian's visit to Morlana 1. During Aveross' visit and conversation with Selby, both of them are rudely interrupted by a jealous patron who was trying to insult Aveross, and it almost has a beat-for-beat similarity with Cassian's visit, as he too had some troubles with other patrons when speaking with the local hostess.
This is something amusing. What?
What does that mean?
Oh, that is a hard look for a little thing like you.
Now, while the incident happened to Cassian and not Luthen, it's an oddly similar circumstance, if not intentional. Another piece of Aveross' story that might also align with the Andor show is that Aveross is described to have a blue lightsaber. and we know for a fact that Luthen has a blue kyber crystal back in episode 4. So again, it just seems like this is way too much of a coincidence that both characters share so many similar story beats and personality traits. I initially thought that the possibility of Luthen being Rael Aveross was only due to them sharing a common name. But the more I dug into Aveross' story, I couldn't help but notice the increasing amount of similarities between the two. There are plenty of story beats that line up and a character progression that could make a whole lot of sense. So, let me know what you think about this possibility. Is Luthen Rael Rael Aveross? As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.